All right, I think we can begin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. One of the first sessions is always the ones that it take a while to get people in the room as they defrost. So the panel is about Russia competitiveness. I'd like to introduce my panelists. We have Boris Titov, the Presidential Commissioner for Entrepreneurial Rights, Kirill Dmitriev, CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. We have President of the Republic of Tatarstan, Rustam Minnikhanov, and Minister Maxim Oreshkin, Minister of Economic Development. So I'd like to begin by just asking all of you the same question, which is that we are gathering here in Davos this year in 2019 against quite a fractured backdrop. It's a moment, it seems, where you have a lack of trust, brinkmanship in the global economy. We see, we talk about trade wars. We have Brexit. We're questioning about where the European Union is going. We have very, talk of distrust rather than cooperation. So against that backdrop, what is the role of Russia in being a global citizen, a citizen of this role? I'm going to do just a starting with you, Mr. Titov, and then work our way through.
I think it's better to ask the macroeconomical specialist professionals about that, but I can say for us, for Russians, I mostly represent the interest. I work with small and medium and real economy, industrial economy companies. We read about all these wars in the newspapers, practically. We don't feel them. We don't see them. The problems which we face and the goods and the bads are mostly connected with the economical policies inside Russia. Sanctions, practically not. Wars between China and Russia may be a little bit even in our favor, because we see that the Chinese market potentially can grow for us, can be more open for us. So I can't say that it affects Russian small and medium or, not big, not huge businesses in any way.
Okay. Mr. Dmitriev?
Well, I would agree that the world is very fractured, and I think, we meet every year in Davos, and we expect it to be better next year. But clearly it's not happening, so we need to understand why. And I think, almost many people mentally are in a state of war. So it's not a physical war, but it's a war between, Russia, US and China. It's a war between Democrats and Republicans. It's a war between, yellow jackets and French establishment. So many people, including media, is in a state of war. Lots of people try to get President Trump. And I think the state of war is very negative. And Russia really wants to be a positive actor, despite what the opinion is. We ourselves established partnerships with the sovereign wealth funds all over the world. We're actively investing with them, getting IRRs positive in dollars. And that is a testament that Russia is an attractive market with 5 times PE versus 15.5 times PE in the US. And I'd like to quickly use a quote of Churchill. Many people remember that Churchill said, Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. But they don't use the full quote. And the full quote says is, I cannot forecast to use the action of Russia. It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, but perhaps there is key, and that key is Russian national interest. And I think for people to really understand what Russian national interest is important. And it's not about taking over other nations. It's about building efficient economy. It's about being a good player. And I think there is a major misunderstanding of Russian national interest. And I'll use one example, and then we'll wait for other questions. It's a FIFA World Cup. So many people came to Russia, and they expected it to be closed society, not good experience. Many people stayed away. But all of the surveys showed that when people were physically in Russia, they saw how it was organized. They were extremely excited and incredibly positive. And we almost need to have people physically be in Russia to understand the true Russia. And by the way, many American companies are still in Russia. And we have US as being third largest investor in new projects in Russia last year, after China, and Germany. So I think my key point is that Russian national interest needs to be better understood, and hopefully this discussion will help a little bit on that.
Got it. I want to come back to you because you've raised the issue of sanctions, you've raised the issue of investment into Russia, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. But President Minnikhanov, this is an important question for you because, of course, you have foreign car companies in Tatarstan. So what do you see the role of your part of the world in the global economy?
I will speak Russian. I can also speak Tatar, but I think I will stick with Russian. I represent one of the constituent entities of our country, the Russian Federation. As you said, we have many international companies operating in our republic. During this period, characterized by political disagreements between us, not a single company left the region. Instead, many new companies arrived. We are developing new platforms. At the level of various businesses, we do not see nor feel any difficulties, but politicians do feel them. Still, we managed to preserve all of our relations, good relations with American companies, with European companies, and now we are working together with Arab companies. Asian companies and Chinese companies especially, well, time cures all the wounds. In time, this will pass, and we have to maintain the good relations we have and continue to work.
Minister Oreshkin, particularly important question for you, seen as your role, as Minister of Economic Development. What is Russia's role in the world, global citizen?
Well, first of all, we need to understand what is happening in the global world, why these trade wars are happening and other things like that. And the problem is not one that is short-term problem. It's a long-term problem of, I would call it, end of long-term economic policy supercycle in the global, in countries like United States and Europe. It's actually started in mid-80s and now it's coming to an end. The stories that are connected with the income inequality, growing costs of such things like healthcare, like education in countries like United States and Europe. And this all results in, political volatility on both sides of the ocean, yellow jackets in France. It's also arising from this long-term problem. And what we see these days is that, policymakers in United States and Europe, they're trying to find a short-term answer to those long-term problems. So, for example, look at the United States, the story with the trade wars. They are trying to address anger that is on the part of the population of the United States by showing an enemy. China, Russia, these are the enemies. This is the key reason why you're living poor, while your real income is not increasing, while the cost of the healthcare and education is soaring and you cannot afford, for example, education for your children. So they're trying to put an enemy that is outside the country. And the real enemy is inside those countries in the long-term structural problems of the economic policy. So what we're trying to do in Russia is actually to build a sustainable long-term policy, which will be beneficial for all the citizens of Russia. So this is the main story, this is the key idea that we have behind what we're doing.
So I want to pick up and start with you then and ask you, Mr. Titov is saying that sanctions have had virtually no effect. Is that true? What is the effect on sanctions on the Russian economy?
Well, of course, there were effects on the financial markets, especially what we saw in 2014. We had a recession in 2015, but since then the economy is starting to recover. Of course, there is a lot of structural issues. We're trying to solve them one by one. We started with the broad set of macroeconomic reforms, inflation targeting, new fiscal rules, and so on and so forth. And now we're going deeper into the pushing investment climate to a new level. If you look at these such indicators like doing business of World Bank, we are 31st already. And we started 5 years ago with the levels above, behind, we were at 120th position 5 years ago. So we're doing step by step, trying to build a sustainable systemic framework which will be supporting the growth, and the growth not only of the economy as a whole, but of each citizen in Russia.
I mean, is it disappointing to you that the Trump administration has not been able to stop, Congress from, imposing more sanctions, even on a more durable basis?
Well, it's not only a Trump administration, it's U.S. political system which is
Right.
resulting, then it's not trying to solve the real problems that are within the United States, within the socio-economic policies of the United States. They're trying to find an enemy and win a political game. So that is the key problem. It's not a problem only for Russia. It's now a problem with China. It's a problem for a global economy.
Are you trying to lobby, and if so, who are you lobbying in the U.S., to stop further imposition, which is...
We were not involved in doing something on the
But as
US,
a government, yeah.
Well, we're doing what we need to do inside the country. We have a lot of problems, a lot of issues that need to be solved, hard problems, big problems, which cannot be solved in a short period of time. So we're concentrating fully on what is happening inside the economy and the problems that we have.
Okay. Mr. Dmitriev, you talked about investment. So you have promised President Putin that you would bring in, I believe you said 110 billion in foreign investment to Russia. Can you tell us at what point you are, and where that is coming? You mentioned that there is still investment from the US, from Germany. So where is that coming from? How much more do you need to get?
So already with our partners, we invested $25 billion in the Russian economy over the last 7 years that we were operating. And then, as I mentioned before, with $10 returns every year. So again, we need to destroy this myth that Russia is not producing positive returns. It is producing positive returns. Russian banks, Mr. Kostin is here, are doing well and getting good rates of return, and so do our investors. Secondly, government is really undertaking a massive national projects plan. And as part of this national projects plan, we believe it's very important to bring in foreign investors because, frankly, lots of co-investment, in addition to government money, brings additional transparency and clarity into projects. So with United Arab Emirates, we've done 45 investments already, and we have major investments flows coming from the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. We have major investments with China. 28 investments have been done by Russia-China Fund, which is our partnership with Sovereign Wealth Fund of China. Yesterday, we had a great meeting with Prime Minister Abe, and Japanese investments are increasing. We have a Russia-Japan investment fund. So through those partnership vehicles, and again, I agree with Mr. Oreshkin about short-term nature of many of the moves we see by US and some other players. But we are doing longer-term moves by building partnerships with the leading economies of the world to invest together and get good returns. So, of course, we need to do more. And, of course, Russia and we are going to outline a strategy for investment into national projects of Russia, what are the returns in different sectors, and this is one of our agenda items for Davos. But we believe partnership with the leading economies of the world, sovereign wealth funds working together and investing in Tatarstan, for example, which is a great investment destination within Russia, is a positive way to address economic issues facing Russia.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia. I believe in the middle of last year, there was 10 billion pledged by Saudi Arabia. As of the middle of last year, 2 billion had been invested. At what level are we now?
Yeah, so basically we're at a 2.5 billion, and there are some mega deals discussed by Saudi to invest in our LNG sector and in our petrochemical sector. So it's a really very good cooperation. And by the way, it's an example where 3 years ago, Russia and US were really not having a good relationship. You know, many people blame Saudi Arabia for pressure on the Soviet Union because they brought oil prices very low when Soviet Union collapsed, obviously war in Afghanistan. But in 3 years, under the leadership of President Putin, His Majesty King of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, we were able to really make it a strategic, positive relationship with an OPEC, non-OPEC oil deals. They stabilized oil prices with major investment inflows. And it's an example how in a fractured world, we can have positive impact in 2-3 years of rebuilding relationship between countries.
I want to turn to essentially the same question, but to President Minnikhanov. You mentioned you have Ford Motor Company, Daimler Trucks factories in Tatarstan. Are you concerned that this rift in relations, as the minister was saying, for whatever reason, whether it be for domestic reasons, between not just in the global economy, but between Russia and the US, Russia and EU, sanctions. Are you worried that this jeopardizes your investments inside Tatarstan?
Ну, я должен
I have to say that the sanctions would not yield any positive impact, neither for our partners abroad nor for us. Still, Ford as a company continues to operate in our region. Daimler followed through with some major investments. In the beginning of Q2, they will launch a new production line, 50,000 units. Mercedes and Kamaz will launch this joint production line. So these companies are operating and collaborating successfully. It's quite a different matter when it comes to bringing American and European companies on board, new American and European companies on board. Still, negotiations are underway. Last year, at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, we signed a number of credit and loan agreements, investment agreements with Deutsche Bank. 800 million they will invest into a new ethylene production complex. Then 50 million euros will be invested into generation capacities. Even though things were a lot easier before 2014 and it was easier to reach agreements, still we continue to work in this area. We are a large rubber producer. 80% of rubber products are exported, and all of the world and global companies use our rubber products. I can't really say that we feel entirely comfortable, but we still have access to a number of banks. Well, a number of our companies feel the pressure, but we're looking for other options. We're looking for partners. And work is underway.
Go ahead, I was finishing the translation.
I would like to jump in because you know that if you look at the number of countries with which relations of Russia are worsening and a number of countries with which relations of Russia is improving, actually the number of countries with which relations are improving will be much, much bigger. You know, Kirill just was mentioning...
And sorry, George, so I understand, with whom, with Russia's relationships?
Yeah.
Okay,
Because
specifically Russia's with...
Kirill was just mentioning Japan. We had a great meeting between President Putin and Prime Minister Abe yesterday in Moscow. China, you know, we are above 100 billion of USD in terms of turnover. Last year it's the record high, and we are now doing a lot of joint projects. Southeastern Asia, a lot of countries with which we are increasing the number of projects we are conducting together. Arab world, Saudi Arabia, Arab Emirates, and so on and so forth. But if you even look into the situation with Europe, and if you put all the newspapers and headlines aside and look just at the figures, you'll find out that turnover between Russia and Europe have increased by dozens of percentage points in the recent years. The imports of Russia from Europe in the past couple of years plus 40%, 40. Joint investment projects, Nord Stream, a number of atomic plant construction in Finland and Hungary, and a number of other big investment projects which are conducted together. And the European partners are participating in projects like Yamal LNG and Arctic LNG, with the Total French company playing a key role there. Europe is voicing intention to shift from the US dollar towards more use of euro, and we are working with our European partners on these of the issues. There is a big number of projects in those areas where Russia is having the common border with European Union. For example, Russia, Finland, we're having 3 big projects of improving infrastructure on the border, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the facts, if you look at the figures, you will find out that the situation with Russia in Europe is actually progressing. Some time ago, I even called it kind of renaissance in the Russia-Europe relations. Of course, there is the political buzz. Of course, there is the buzz in the media. That's okay, it's normal. But in reality, the real facts, the real figures are showing that, what is even interesting, that if you even look at the figures of trade turnover between Russia and the United States, it's better last year than it was the year before.
Which way is that going?
Well, both ways. It's both ways. Of course, it's a pretty small figure. It's really limited interactions, really limited number of projects. But, dynamics is positive.
But, Trump was here last year, exhorting all foreign companies to invest in the U.S. Has that happened?
Well, you'd better ask U.S. administration about that. But once again, all these statements, all these policy initiatives, they are short-term in nature. And U.S. society should look at the internal problems, which are real and which are the source of the political shifts that we're witnessing there.
Got it. So let's move back then to what you're doing inside the country then. I would like to talk about privatizations. And can you give us an update on, your privatization program? That's very important in an audience, such as Davos, where there are huge investors. It seems from the outside, but you will correct me, that to a certain extent, it's been shelved. There were a number of companies that we, as journalists, covered, Sovcomflot, Aeroflot, Alrosa, big companies. Where are we with the privatization program, and what do you wish to say to those who are?
You'd better ask the head of the Alrosa company, which is sitting here, which is present on.
I may call on you to tell us where we are then, but can you give us sort of a panoramic view on where?
But if you want a panoramic view, you should not ask a specific question. You should ask a panoramic question.
Privatization.
No. You've started with the what is being done inside the country. So there is a lot of things that are being done inside the country.
Great.
So three main.
Inside the country, can I please?
No. One second. I do. That's fine. You can give me what's happening. But I do think in an audience where you have foreign investors, privatization is an important point. But please, we can go to Mr. Titov first.
I will give a short answer here, because you know that we are working on a number of deals. We are working, in a close format, because when you're preparing the deals, it should not be public. You should not discuss on the panel with whom we are talking about what we are talking. So there is a number of assets which we believe will be positive for the Russian economy if there will be additional investments made also from the foreign partners. So we are working with them on those assets. And for example, the example of Alrosa company, where we had, I believe, in the past several years, we had 2 times we were selling a part of the government stake. And there is a really brilliant pool of the investors, including foreign investors, which are present in that company, which is delivering very strong results.
Great. Mr. Titov, then I'm going to go even broader. Everybody knows Russia for oil and gas. Tell me the different story then, how Russia is changing away.
Yeah, I'll go even broader than that.
And then
you know that with this positive, sense which we are getting from the previous speakers, I can say I'm an ombudsman. I run the ombudsman office. So the people come to me when there is a problem already. And that's why I'm concentrating bad news mostly about the economy. And I can say,
there are a lot of sessions on happiness and wellness here at Davos. I recommend them.
So we have to be honest that not all the problems are solved in Russia. We have still the problems of business climate. Sometimes we use criminal law unlawfully use the criminal law against businessmen. We have problems with bureaucracy, corruption. Sometimes, but to some sense, we found the way how to deal with it. I mean, we are doing quite a lot of programs. We still are not, I think, in a position to say that we are solved the problems which we have, but we found the steps out, and we already made the first step. I mean, with the criminal law, it's become a little bit, to my opinion, a little bit, even because I'm concentrating the bad news, still I'm saying a little bit better, because we have less people in jail before the court hearings than before. We are more, trying to behave in a more humanitarian way.
Just for those of you, those in the panel who are not from Russia, you were talking about corporate. So if I want to start a business, how?
No. So I already started the business, and then I grew up, and suddenly somebody says, "Okay, it's a good business. Let's try to take it."
Okay.
And we are better than that, protecting the rights of the businessmen. I'm saying that now, for example, control, bureaucracy, administrative pressure. We are now starting a big program. For example, we are taking the checklists from Canada and trying to implement, at least in several regions, for the restaurants, cafes, which are growing very fast in Russia. I mean, it's a big wave of small investments, of growing small and medium businesses with new brains. I mean, they're first learning, they're getting prepared for that because they go through a lot of courses, coaching courses. Russia is #2 market for coaching in the world now. So a lot of people try first to learn, to know how to do business, and then to do business. And this is a new wave in Russia. And I can say that now we're trying to implement with the Ministry of Economy and the government some new ways how to make this pressure lower, to lower the pressure from bureaucratic pressure on businesses. For foreign investment, I can say that it's a good news that in this bad, not very good environment, I think that there are several good news because, first of all, from 70,000 applications to me as an ombudsman, only 16 were from foreign investors, from foreign companies. I mean that mostly they don't feel this pressure. And that I'm saying that it's better environment for them than for small and medium businesses in Russia. Also, if they choose where to go, of course, we have not yet done what we could have done to make our climate better. But if we compare with other countries, it's not a big, offer to choose from, because even with the BRICS companies, I don't have to even mention to the businessmen that the risks even in China. Not talking about India, not talking about Brazil or South Africa. Of course, Russia in many cases are better.
Just so I understand, in your role as ombudsman, is one of your roles also to prompt consolidation? So small companies to become bigger, to be able to cope better?
We are doing programs. My main role is to work with problems. I mean that they apply to me. Each case we have to solve, we have to work with. And but it all brings us to seeing some problems which are systematic problems for the economy in Russia. And that's why we also work with macroeconomical proposals.
Got it.
Because every investor weights risks and returns. Risks are high, but becoming better. And you can't compare them with the 90s, for example. 90s were much more difficult.
Got it. You wanted to jump in, Mr. Dmitriev.
Yeah, so I'll make a couple of examples because I think it's important to think about examples and maybe some ideas where we can really improve also efficiency. And I know Ministry of Economy is really driving this process. But we participated in both privatizations of Alrosa. So we came in the first one, we came in the second one. The IRR, because we exited from the first one, was 25% in US dollars. The IRR on the second one was around 17% on US dollars. And Sergei came in. We see I'm on the board of Alrosa. The company is run very efficiently. We believe very much in the prospects of the company, and that's one example. But investment in Russia is not only about privatizations. So, for example, we invested in a deal with Alibaba. Jointly with our partners, we have a controlling stake in Alibaba Russia. We expect to close this deal in the next 2 months. And basically, that business is growing 50% a year in Russia. And e-commerce business is very promising, and that's a very good example. But also, obviously, we were investors in some of the projects of Sibur, which is a leading petrochemical project, company in Russia that is doing tremendously well and is creating lots of added value to the Russian gas that we have. We also invested in Vladivostok Airport with Changi Airports, and the passenger traffic grew 45% year on year versus last year. So there are lots of areas of growth that are happening, but I agree with Mr. Titov that there are areas for improvement, and I think one of them is actually more competition and less government control over certain sectors of economy. And we see where we have lots of competition, such as in retail and mobile operators. Our companies are very efficient. When there is less competition, our companies are less efficient. So that's, I think, one of the key areas. A second area is really, we already have very good macroeconomy and macroeconomics, but we need to focus more on microeconomics, so what some people call industrial economics. and that is adjusting different regime in different sectors so they become really investable. You know, in many sectors, return on capital in Russia, you know, is around 8-9%. In some sectors, it's 15-16%. But we want to make sure government thinks about investability of different sectors and doesn't think so much about budget approach to solving problems where government money is given for free, but budget in addition to investments. And I think that is key. And the final point that Mr. Titov has mentioned is entrepreneurship in Russia. I think definitely there can be more done in understanding the entrepreneurs create value, not government, and that entrepreneurs drive value and not government. And the last point I'll mention very briefly on sanctions. I think, you know, one of the detrimental effects on sanctions is that it diminishes liberal agenda in Russia. I think they're so poorly conceived that basically restrictions on Russia make many people in Russia think we don't need connection to the West. We do not need connection to the US. We will do it by themselves. So ironically, I think the sanctions undermine the liberal agenda in Russia, and that's a problem. And I see Mr. Ishengi here from Munich Security Conference, so hopefully that will be addressed soon at his conference soon. But you know, it's Russia wants to be a positive player in the world. Let's work on the positive agenda and move the investment and entrepreneurship agenda forward.
So I want to just ask you a quick question on that, and then I want to go on diversification in tech, because you raised tech with Alibaba, and so I want to go to that. But it's interesting what you say about it almost is an excuse to dampen the liberal agenda in Russia. Does it also, I mean, presumably it also galvanizes anti-American sentiment, and then, you know, kind of isolates, if you will, I mean, even at the top level, even the people around, you know, President Putin to be, you know, even more isolationist, if you will.
Yeah, so I agree with Mr. Oreshkin. First of all, Russia adjusted to sanctions, so the growth is 2%, oil price is stable, so really no effect. But it does have an isolationist effect on the minds of many Russian people who do see that, you know, maybe we shouldn't cooperate so much with the West. And again, it goes back to my first point of really many people do not fully understand Russia and how to work with Russia, and respect is very important in dealing with Russia, but, you know, that's sort of.
But so, Minister Oreshkin, I'm going to ask you about tech, but so how does Russia resolve that?
Well, just to continue what Kirill was addressing, the key story is that sanctions are constructed in that way, that is, they are not actually addressing anything in Russia. They're trying to address something in the United States or something in Europe. So that,
I get that, but that's the cause. But
Yeah.
they exist.
Well,
We can talk about domestic American politics if you like, but I'd rather not. But so what do you do about it?
Well, once again, the answer is pretty simple. We're concentrating on those issues that we have inside the country. We are concentrating on the increasing competition, you know, shifting the investment structure in the economy towards more productive investments. We are working on the improving the human capital by investing in healthcare and education, and so on and so forth. We are trying to put the productivity growth to a higher level by trying to support new implementation of new management techniques in the industry, in other sectors of the economy. So we are trying to solve a number of small things which are not that interesting, which are not geopolitical, and so on and so forth, in order to get the country run better, showing better results for the country as a whole and for a particular citizen.
So tell me about, you know, like many companies, you know, you're really trying to do a big tech drive. You know, kind of in investing in technology, you know, creating the new Googles of the world, the new Facebooks of the world, and so on. Where are you on that drive?
Well, we have a number of companies which are well known globally, like Kaspersky, which the product that is used across the globe. We have the Yandex, which is expanding. No, it's not only a key player on the domestic market, which is expanding on other markets. For example, recently we were with the president in Serbia, and there was implementation of Yandex technologies there, and they are doing pretty well. So there are, of course, such things which are also high-tech, like creating of nuclear power plants across the globe, and Rosatom here is the top player without any competitors nearby. and so on and so forth. There's a lot of areas where Russia is progressing. For example, air construction industry. We have a new plane which was created and now going through a number of tests, which shows that the results of this plane, it's the middle-range plane, is better than Boeing 737, 10 to 15% more efficient, and so on and so forth. So a big number of areas, and I can continue with that.
But how do you balance? I mean, there's a global backlash, if you will, especially against social media right now. At the moment, there's a huge drive for privacy. There's increased privacy laws around the world. In Europe, GDPR. Now in the U.S., more of a focus on privacy. What is your view inside Russia and vis-a-vis the companies that do business outside of Russia?
Well, in terms of privacy, with each new step in technology, especially in the IT technologies, there will be less and less privacy because we all becoming more public. We are posting in the social networks, other people posting us in the social networks. So the privacy is declining. It will continue to decline. And for some of the problems that we have inside Russia, it's really a good story because it helps to bring the quality of the human capital that works for a government to a higher level. Because when you're visible to everyone, you either work for the benefit of the ordinary citizens, or we will be wiped out from the government structures.
I see in the front row one of your top journalists who was on a panel that my boss moderated yesterday, and I thought you spoke very eloquently, about, you see things now and about the ability to make money off of things that are completely not verified, and this is a huge problem, around the world. And obviously, this has been a problem in Russia. Let me use the word, versus the U.S. Elections or whatnot. I mean, what all of you? I ask you. I mean, what is happening here? Can we believe what is said in the U.S. about Russia? What is said in Russia about the U.S.? I think it's important for economic development because of what you said about dampening the liberal agenda.
But what is said? Please name it. What we will discuss. Well, what is said in the U.S. media? Just name it.
No, but I mean tampering in the U.S. elections. I mean and everything that has followed that.
How?
I don't mean to go off topic, but I think your role in the world has been, as you said, stay away from the headlines from Europe. What would your response be here? This is a global.
The response
audience.
is already done by Mr. Dmitriev, who said that Russia wants to be positive in relations with other countries. Russia wants to bring peace across the globe. Russia wants to make joint projects. That's it.
Okay. Please, Mr. Dmitriev.
Well, just one sentence, and I fully agree with Mr. Oreshkin. I think I see a big problem is that whoever now jumps in and says, I want US and Russia to have a better relations, he's getting crucified, or she. And that's wrong. I mean, the risks of Third World War, yes, we don't want to mention it, maybe again at Munich Security Conference, but, they're increasing because there is lack of understanding and there is lack of dialogue. And it's totally not fair that people who are trying to say, okay, let's work better with the US, let's work better with Russia, they're getting crucified by the media. So I think President Putin, President Trump, they agreed to have a business dialogue between Russia and the US. It hasn't been implemented yet, but it's a very important step because we need to have business dialogue. And Mr. Oreshkin mentioned that lots of US businesses, they're quietly in Russia. There is a Foreign International Advisory Council that has all of the large US corporates. They're present in Russia. They're selling products to Russian market, etc. So frankly, we need to go maybe US-Russia relationship 3.0, 4.0, 4.0 is here at the forum is a very popular thing. But, we need to start with acknowledging improving US-Russia relationship is good. That's a very important step.
Got it. At one point, we thought President Putin was going to come here to Davos this year.
Well, there is a lot of stuff that is needed to be done inside the country. He's today, for example, meeting President Erdogan in Moscow.
Just a last question, and then I want to turn it to the audience. Is it time to think about a future of Russia post-President Putin?
Well,
can we imagine it?
Of course, there will be a future.
I'm from a country where I'm from Italy. Our people, we have, 20 governments in 3 years. So, for me, I look at you and I say, wow, stability, longevity.
We should look on Russia, post all of us, not only the President Putin, because post me, I'm a little bit younger than he,
Just a little bit. I know you're trying to be polite.
We should look on Russia 2015, we should look Russia 2100, and so on and so forth. We should look definitely so longer term to understand how the country will be looking like and what should we do this day in order to have a better country by that point of time.
But Russia has been identified with Mr. Putin, with President Putin for so long. I mean, can we start thinking beyond?
Russia has a history.
Very long and important.
It's also associated with the Peter the Great. It's also associated with, a lot of other stuff,
You know that I was a candidate for presidency in the last elections. Practically won. I got 1%. I can say that we are thinking, and Russia is open for change. But the change should be essential from inside the economy, first of all. We have to think about Russia without dependence on oil. This is the main thing which we are thinking about. How the people will elect him. Because, with such an economy which dictates the structure of the society today, we don't see the political change in the nearest future. We have to change the economy. We have to give more incentive to private businesses to build up the middle class of the country. And this will be normal, essential change. But this has to be done from the new economical policies, which we now in a discussion with the government, because we represent another group of economists, which were for more active economy, for quantitative easing for Russia, because our financial policies are very, very strict. They are freezing up the growth. And that's what we have to change first.
So before I open it up, though, I do want to give the opportunity. Is there something important about the new competitive drive that we did not touch upon and that you wanted to add?
We're here for discussion, so let's jump in.
Jump in? Okay. All right. So in the audience. Okay. So the first question to the lady in the second row.
Thank you. I'm Alessandra Winkler, and I'm a global shaper. In the essence of building relationships with countries around the world, my question is, what is the Russian interest in a country like Venezuela? Knowing that Venezuela is a failed state, why does the Russian government openly support the Maduro regime? Is it an economical interest? Is it a geopolitical influence on the Western Hemisphere?
I see you're all jumping to answer that question.
Well, actually, what we are trying to do is, with any country, whether it's in Latin America, in Asia, we're trying to find joint projects which are beneficial for both of the countries. Of course, what we are witnessing in Venezuela, it's really extremely deep problems. It's, I believe it's the worst economy globally these days. So, if you look at the number of projects that Russia is having with Venezuela, it's extremely limited. So it's actually not a big, economic story for us. So of course, what we're trying to do everywhere in the world, we are trying to work with the official governments of those countries. So that's what we are trying to do in Venezuela, and like we are talking to all countries across the globe.
Okay, second question. We'll get this gentleman here and then.
Yeah, my name is Fang Xinghai. I'm from China. Now, the question is for Mr. Dmitriev. The Russians, to me, I mean, you look very Western, right? And your religion is a Western religion. Why isn't Russia considered a Western country? Why Russia is not accepted, by the West as a Western country?
Well, first of all, I would say that Russia is accepted, and I think the periods we are seeing over the last 5-6 years is really a major period of misunderstanding. And one of the reasons is that, for example, there are small countries that are Baltic countries, and I personally love them. But for them to get some European support, for them to get some military support, they need to portray Russia as a danger, as a threat, as an enemy, something that Mr. Oreshkin also mentioned. And, they go there and they say, oh, Russia is a threat. Russia has no intention to go into Baltics or anything like this. So I think there is something about small nations willing to get support and projecting this image. But I think Russia is a very important place between Europe and Asia. And we, for example, are investing now with Japanese into a digital bridge between Japan and Europe through Russia. We'll use Transneft telecom fiber network to have this bridge. So I think actually it's something we need to work on.
But you say that Russia has always been considered a Western country. It just, just like the last few years, Russia was not considered. But previously, Russia was always considered a Western country?
Well, I would say that Russia, and if we go to monarchy time, etc., it was always an integral part of Europe and was also working close with Europe. We have Russia France Fund, Russia Italy Fund. Lots of our values, they're European values. But I think now Russia is in a unique position as, in some ways, a place between very fast-growing Asia, industrially strong Europe, and it needs to take advantage of that place in the world. But definitely, we see Russia as working very close with Europe. Germany is our biggest trading partner, and there is a whole idea of, Europe from, east from Lisbon to Vladivostok. So we'll just need to make it happen through positive measures.
Great.
And I will
Please.
also give a small answer. Russia is Russia. It's not West. It's not East. Russia is Russia. It's actually, in reality, one of the few, maybe it's the only global country on the globe, which is not West and which is not East, which is both.
I want to, Pat, just a quick question, Dima, because you raise a very interesting problem that goes back to the fundamental issue of Russia in the world. I want to ask the president here, you have a big Muslim community in Tatarstan. How much do you build relations with other Muslim countries? How much of that is important for your growth? Because and then I'll pass it.
First of all, it's not only Tatarstan has a Muslim population, more than 20 million in Russia overall. In our republic, over 2 million. And of course, today the Russian Federation is an observer in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. We are actively working in this particular direction. We have a strategic group, Islamic World, representatives of 30 countries are there. We conduct congresses, forums, meet them, former officials from these countries, members of this group, very influential people. More than 20 million Muslims live in Russia, as I mentioned before. And for more than 10 years already, we hold Economic Islamic Forum in Kazan. A lot of attention on the part of Islamic world and on the part of regions where Muslims live, halal, and recently halal way of life, organization of this way of life. It's a huge business, a very interesting one and attractive, and we are working on this now. But of course, there is such a Muslim factor. Well, for instance, I am a Muslim, and it opens a lot of doors in the Arab world, in the Central Asia. We have perfect relations with many countries, and Turkey, for instance, is a major investor in our republic. More than 10 major enterprises and factories were built over the last 7 to 8 years. And I believe that Well, President Putin appointed me as a coordinator of the strategic group I mentioned before. So we are trying to use all these factors. When you ask questions, where will we go when they don't expect us? We'll find the doors. We'll open the doors. We'll find those who will wait for us. Well, you don't have to pray only in one place. You have to be, well, you have to take all the options.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Dmitriev.
Good morning. I'm Dmitriev. I'm the editor for energy markets for Reuters. I have two questions, one for Kirill, one for Maxim. Mr. Dmitriev, it has been, I think, 3 years since you've mentioned for the first time a possibility of a joint deal between Russia and OPEC. It was 3 years ago in Davos. The deal was pretty revolutionary for the oil markets, and I know you spoke to our television earlier this morning and you said that it has probably brought about 110 billion of extra revenues to Russia. Well, of course, the downside of the deal was that the US shale oil production has risen very, very steeply in the same space of 3 years. So how much of a concern is this to you, the fact that the US production seems to be unstoppable and the fact that Russia and OPEC are sort of losing the market share to the US, and how much pressure are you sort of facing from within the country from people who say, well, look, maybe we should stop cutting because the US is only increasing? And my second question is to Minister Oreshkin. I really enjoyed the broad conversation you had with Alessandra, my boss, but she's paying his salary for being a man of detail. So I'll ask you a very simple and detailed question. What are you going to actually sell this year in terms of privatizing the companies? What are the companies on the list? Thank you very much.
You thought I was detailed.
So on oil, very briefly, I think the deal is very positive for Russia. We did it when oil price was 35. It's 63 right now, and that's a good range. Russia is not interested in very high oil prices, but we also believed when oil prices were too low, it really was stopping investment in the industry. And you would have very high volatility. For many years you have 35s, and eventually you would have hundreds and so on. So stable oil price is key. Our partnership with Saudi Arabia is very strategic. And again, I mentioned this as an example of bad relationships 4 years ago, great relationships now, something we hope to do with the US at some point. Shale production, different analysis shows that really for shale to start going down dramatically, you need to have oil prices below $40 a barrel. And we don't believe that $40 a barrel is sustainable, is good for the Russian economy, is good for the Saudi economy. So I think shale is a factor. They are producing. I think they also have some limitations that we'll see soon. And we believe that the most recent cut, a very moderate cut, is very appropriate, and we see already the effects of a stable oil price. So we don't believe that we should do competitive actions to try to destroy shale. This is not how Russia views the world. Let's have win-win scenarios, good for producers and for consumers.
Mr. Oreshkin.
And on the privatization, once again, when you're preparing the deals, it should be done quietly. Those who know, those who need to know about those deals, they know it. And Reuters, unfortunately or luckily, is not a big asset manager or a hedge fund, which we need to discuss at the...
Luckily.
Well, you to choose, you work there. So whether it's luckily or, So, and of course, at some point, all those things are becoming public, and they become announced, and the public part of the process starts. So when the time will come, you will know.
Okay. This hand came up first, and then I'll tell you what, since we only have 4 minutes, would you mind asking your questions together, and then we can do one after the other.
So my name is Roland Kötter. I'm representing BD, a leading global medtech company. We're present in Russia for many years, and I'm impressed by the quality now of business people coming out of university. However, whenever we're talking about investments there, the bureaucracy is really hindering that, especially the registration processes of technology of medical devices, which is amongst the longest in the world, and is really restricting the access of the Russian healthcare to modern technology. How are you addressing to improve this?
That's a great question. If I could ask you, do you mind, sorry, just because then we only have 4 minutes, I would like him to get your
Ignacio Garcia Alves, Arthur Di Little, Strategic Consultancy. We have just established an office in Moscow, and I can confirm that the view from the outside and the view from the inside is very different. I can also confirm a little bit the part on the bureaucracy, where I think it's important to help. And I believe what is very important is to, on the image of Russia, for the external world, I mean, to clarify what are the economic sectors on which you want to become the best. And I think that, for example, in infrastructure, you have a very large country, so mobility, energy, maybe also communications, I think, could be sectors where you could be. And I wanted to know if you agree with that, if that can be the
Thank
sector.
you. Who would like
Yes,
to do? Mr. Titov.
actually, I can try both.
Do you know what? That's great that you're
take over
taking
from
out
the
information. Look at the clock as well as you do
it's
that.
a very, very small information about the industries which we think are the main. First, bureaucracy. Big problem in Russia. We face it every day. We did several attempts. We tried to do a special law on control. We restricted the number of controls they can do early during the year, but they found another way to go around this law. So it's a continuous battle. Now the last idea is how to win is to do a guillotine. We call it a guillotine. During 3 years, they have to cut these bureaucracy offices, control offices, by themselves. They have to cut the requirements they have in each sector.
Mr. Titov, I'm so sorry.
Yes, I will be very...
so that the others can have a chance to respond as well.
So we will do the best practices in the world, for example, in medicine and medical equipment of Germany, and try to introduce it at least in some regions first. To do it like in Europe. This is what we try to do now. Concerning the possibilities of the future, we think about that. We study what is done in the world, this work we did about all the strategies around the world, and mostly the big countries. And I can say that for us, mostly the industries which we think will be the locomotives of growth are...
And then I'm going to stop you. Give us the answer.
Digital economy. No big news. The economy of small things. Russia doesn't produce small things.
Let's stop there. Digital
industry
economy, small
of
things.
hospitality, which Russia does not develop. 9 sectors altogether, but including equipment, including...
Why don't you speak afterward?
Including construction.
Actually, there is a lot of areas.
There's a lot. So
we
just
can
as a
find,
final comment, Mr. Oreshkin and Mr.
Just to give particular answer on your problem, we have a special mechanism within the ministry and the government which tries to solve those bureaucracy things, put it on the paper, send it to us officially, and we will put it into this mechanism and try to work it out.
Thank you for being pithy. Mr. Dmitriev.
Yeah, we feel that artificial intelligence will change lots of industries, big promise in Russia. And again, we'd love to work with different consulting firms to improve efficiency. I think that's a big promise. We can increase efficiency 20–30% in many industries.
Great. Thank you very much. We have to wrap up. Thank you very much for our panelists. Very patient in answering my questions. Thank you.